Now, a couple of days ago, The Rock graced us with his presence on the island that I was born to announce something completely bad, and that thing was the announcement of the live-action remake of Moana, not even 7 years after that very film was released, whereas with most remakes that have been made 20 or more years after they're released, which is still very stupid to me because the Disney Renaissance wasn't that very long ago compared to the golden age of Disney that was 70 to 80 years ago. And of course, I will admit that this was going to happen in any other way, that it was inevitable that the soulless company that pretends to have one will actually remake all of their films, but of course this one was way too soon, one that involved The Rock, who has been making a lot of things about himself lately, like in Black Adam, who said the hierarchy of power in the DC universe is about to change, where it did, to be fair, when his movie bombed and James Gunn actually took that over, where now he's here to tell us the day after the day of April Fools that live action Moana is coming. Because when I first saw this video, I really did think that this was a late April Fool's joke and that in no way that they would actually be doing this until I saw the sincerity of the video, where my life started to crash down. And today I just wanted to share my thoughts about why this should backfire on Disney and will not work at all, like all live action films have done, especially being this early into the game. And to put things into perspective, I love Moana, I love Lilo and Stitch, two films that are now going to be remade that really took a look at my culture because I am Hawaiian myself, and by extent Polynesian, as what most of Moana tries to represent. But when I see something like this and the other remakes that are going to come out, I look at it as extortion. They don't really add anything new and sometimes prop this up as representation, although the story has been already told before and do nothing overall good for the public. There is just so much stories that haven't been told in the Pacific where they just find the need to retell that instead of providing newer ways to do so. Like you see here in this video they filmed with him, that he is on Oahu near Mokuli'i, otherwise known as Chinaman's Hat, and that island means a lot to me because I was born there and my family still lives there, where there's just so much about it and the rest of the islands that have not been explored in film or any other interesting stories that need to be told there. And the case of Moana did actually bring more of that flavor to the public, directed by the most talented guys who really started the Disney Renaissance era with The Little Mermaid and also brought us other great films like Hercules, Treasure Planet, and The Princess and the Frog. And while I was watching the videos of them giving interviews, they actually brought up this interesting point that puts it against the case of live action movies to begin with, said here.
Because again, these stories hadn't been treated in Disney anywhere, and it's pretty good. This character of Maui was a trickster, a shapeshifter, had a magical fish. He could pull up islands. He was sort of a superhero demigod. That seemed like a great character to do in animation that would be more fun than live action. So that was really the impetus to pitch that.
Which of course, what he's basically saying is that it's more fun to do Maui the way that they did him in this movie because it's animation rather than live action, and now someone like The Rock is not understanding that at all, or even Disney to that extent, about what it truly meant. And when Moana came out, it became another great classic that can stand amongst the likes of Beauty and the Beast and Aladdin, featuring a story and cast that extends throughout all of Polynesia, from Hawaiians to Samoans to Maori, all with a story that led a girl to do what is right to save her people by following her own path and realizing the mistakes that people have made along the way, like Maui. And the movie itself, with the way it feels and the way it was designed with the animation, does in fact feel real. Like, the movie effects actually feel still far more realistic than what Marvel has produced recently, and of course a level above the water and sea creature effects that the live action Little Mermaid has produced in their trailers. Because when you combine all of that together, it really puts into question what exactly is Moana's remake going to add when this becomes the first film adapted from that very style. The style of the revival era of Disney animation tended to take their stories for a more realistic approach in the 3D animation, more fluid and whatnot compared to being portrayed as a flat 2D drawing. The Rock did say that they were going to bring back everyone from Pua to Heihei, which puts into question how exactly are they going to make this work with those characters in that very story. After all, this is a literal retelling that would have the same cast back, which absolutely makes this film more useless than it needs to be, because in a nutshell, it takes away from the point of the movie being an animated feature. As I have said in the past, Disney likes to degrade animation as a medium and put it as a genre within these remakes, and this will exemplify it to the extreme by literally having everything back, which also does not make anything sense for its timing, considering that they are already planning a Disney Plus series for Moana to be released, produced by Walt Disney Animation themselves instead of their TV department, as they have done in the past, which would technically make this into a longer Moana 2. And announcing this during that same time frame is quite honestly idiotic and insanely stupid, considering that Frozen 3 is going to be produced too, and that was the main candidate for a remake before anything else, including Moana, because somehow they won't even take a new approach to the story like tell the original Snow Queen version of it in live action rather than loosely base it off of it. I mean, of course they care more about remaking the popular ones instead of the films that need more love, like Atlantis, which could really work in live action, but they're not going to do that, like in the same case with what Strange Worlds had produced being a box office bomb that they know would not get them any money. And of course, sometimes it does feel awkward for the CGI interacting with live action, whether it be animals or talking pots and pans, where it works better in animation. Like when you take a look at some of the landscapes from a far distance in Moana, it looks real. The water looks real, the island looks real, it really looks like it could take place in our world, but with more spice to it that would actually defy real logic because that's the way animation is. That how that style cannot be told in live action form because it's not real, and why they take away from any emotion that the animals were featured in the films. Like, I really hate to keep bringing this up as an example, but it really is the worst remake of all time in The Lion King, where we can take a look at these scenes contrasting from the original and this one, and you see absolutely nothing worth of value. These animals are just moving their mouths speaking English, and that's virtually it. You don't feel anything or don't know what the hell they're supposed to go through because they don't express it. Whereas in the case of the original, they already made this abundantly clear by having the human expressions on their face of the lions to really show us what he's feeling inside in the moment, where in the case of here, they are doing absolutely nothing. It's really nothing except moving around like a regular lion does, which to be fair, real lions probably have more expressions than the ones they have here, or just any animal at all that is featured in this film. I mean, did you really think I was going to laugh at Seth Rogen or Billy whatever for portraying real warthogs or meerkats who don't even make more than one face in the entire film? No. So why would we feel this way when an actual chicken or an actual pig or an actual big ass crab who sings a song would appear on screen, where actually people think that they might remove him because they can't do that? And that's another thing to add why this won't work, because of what they plan to remove from the original that wouldn't work at all in live action. Only Cinderella has done stuff right to remove little tiny bits and pieces from the original, whereas in the case of Mulan, well, that actually destroyed everything people loved about that film in the first place, and Chinese people really hated it for its grossly inaccurate portrayal of the very culture. And when you take something like those elements away from it, it will definitely not look good in that very film. It's something that then ruins the whole point of the movie to begin with because it has nothing of value that people loved about it. Like, most people do go to these movies for nostalgic reasons and nothing more, and if they don't get what they already knew about those films, then they aren't really going to like it at all. Where when they do notice that, with what they had in The Lion King, despite the soulless, emotionless slop that it was, then people would actually go willingly see it because general audiences don't care as long as it has a popular name attached to it and something familiar that they've already seen. And of course, having the original main characters would actually contribute to that reason why people would see it, like in the case of James Earl Jones, cast once again as Mufasa, whereas when everyone else was replaced, being the only great reason why people would see us, but knowing their track record, it would still manage to mess everything else about it. And discussing all of this, I just read the most infuriating thing about all of this, where the president of Disney Live Action really loved to tout the idea of working with these fantastic partners to tell such a meaningful story on a live action canvas, particularly as we celebrate 100 years of storytelling at Disney, is thrilling. Sean, what the hell is so thrilling about retelling a story you already did? In the case of where 100 years ago, Walt Disney was actually creating different creative stories, where in this case, you are just repackaging them out. Like, you honestly need to rethink how little that statement means in terms of storytelling when you are not really adding much to that story in the first place. You even said that this was early to do so, and are now refusing to acknowledge what this presented to us. Because I almost forgot to add while discussing about the CGI that these films produce, is the fact that they have to include that. I mean, sure, they might film on places like Kauai for the islands in terms of that environment, but thinking in terms of Te Fiti or Te Ka is doing something almost entirely in CGI for such a big character, which when you think about it, is extremely useless because we've already seen those effects within a film that entirely uses CGI. Like, they really have to use CGI in these new films in order to tell some parts, and if they don't, then that story wouldn't exist. Like, take a look at Aladdin. You cannot have the genie unless he is the big blue boy that we know. It's a thought that makes things more redundant than productive, as we know, and how they treat their CGI animators in live action films like Marvel and Disney live action, and how they manage to mess that up and make the stories seem more fake than they need to be, how the colors are just awful and they just deteriorate the experience that makes those worlds seem real. Like, I've already pictured in my mind how the trailer of Moana is going to end up, devoid of anything that looked amazing in the original and just a shell of its former selves. You just see that there's too much stacked up against the case for The Rock having Moana in live action. I mean, of course, I wouldn't think that there would be any other way than having him in it, and that's how it truly is. This is just the way of the world, and we have to accept that for what it is unless we all somehow can come together as a collective to take over Disney somehow. And I just cannot believe I can feel so disrespected as a Polynesian for them making the same story that we've already know of that adds nothing but money to their very pockets. You don't care about our stories or anyone else's because you care more about what's in your best interest to save your failing content machines instead. I really wish I could say more, but that's basically it as far as what we know, and I just want to say I cannot wait to be your primary hate watcher for all of these movies because I enjoy shitting on Disney on a daily basis now. Because if we can agree on one thing, we can enjoy hating on something together where you can delegate me to watching this so you won't have to and won't have on the first hand suffer watching 2 hours worth of nothing added to your very life. And of course, with that all said, I'm all done now, so goodbye.